各位老师、各位同学，大家好。我们欢迎大家参加这场演讲。你都知道我们有这个中国哲学外文资料中心，这个今天的演讲也属于这个中心的演讲系列。So welcome everybody to this talk today, and as you all know, we have this International Center for Chinese Philosophy. So we have this lecture series, and I welcome you to today's talk. I probably just give you a brief overview or brief introduction in Chinese, and then Professor Mollgaard will speak in English. 就是我今天很高兴、很荣幸邀请到这个Mollgaard教授，Mollgaard教授那么他在我不知道你们应该看不出来，他是丹麦人。他是在就是欧洲在欧洲丹麦出生，但是长期在美国教书然后研究中国哲学。那么他不是第一次来台湾是第三次来台湾，所以我们这一次就是真的哲学系的詹康老师还有我们就一起请他到台湾来做这样一个访问他的这个访问时期就要做3场演讲所以说今天是这个应该是第3场。对，那么先简单跟各位介绍一下Mollgaard教授Mollgaard教授是杜伟明老师的学生，应该都知道，各位知道杜伟明是在美国或者在西方相当有影响的一位华裔学者，在美国推动中国哲学。那Mollgaard教授现在在这个 University of Rhode Island 教书哲学系，那么他1993年这个就在哈佛大学拿到博士学位那我刚刚才知道，就是说他在写博士，就是他的 advisor除了这个杜伟明以外另外一位是 Stephen Owen， 不知道大家有没有听过？中文应该翻译成欧文，是不是？欧文就是在对，就是在这个中国文学研究上，就是古典文学上很有名的一位学者然后还有第三位是 Benjamin I. Schwartz， 对，就是他的第3个 advisor 也很有名的一位，就是做中国思想史的专家。然后第4位我在刚才很意外发现是 Stanley Cavell， 对，是一个也相当有名的美国哲学家。这个博士论文我们在我们东吴大学的图书馆里面发现，我刚刚今天早上去找一下，就发现我们有这个论文，所以这个论文也我还没有看但是其实我是蛮期待阅读就是这个是就是这个Mollgaard教授的这个论文里面在研究或在探讨 early Confucian ethics， 就是早期儒家伦理学的一些面向。所以如果各位有兴趣的话，也可以事后再去找那我们图书馆有这一本，然后有另外一本Mollgaard教授有写了一本 Introduction to Taoist Thought, Action, Language and Ethics in 庄子。对，所以这个是Mollgaard教授近几年所关注的另外一个议题就是道家的伦理学，特别是庄子庄子的思想庄子的伦理学。那这本书我个人觉得是非常有价值的一本书那书面上或者那个封面上写的是 introduction， 其实你说一个入门书好像也不是，但是非常深入的一个研究。这是就是 Eske 跟我讲，这个是一个编辑的要求就是因为我们现在活在一个网络时代，如果上面没有写 introduction to Taoist thought， 读者就找不到。就在 Google 上你打关键词的时候就是如果在书面封面上没有提到 Taoist thought 或者提到 introduction 的话，就找不到。所以这本书有这样子一个书名那Mollgaard教授的这个诠释庄子的特色在于说，他用欧陆的思维来解读庄子所以这一点我觉得这个是一个非常有趣的做法Mollgaard教授蛮有贡献。那这2本书可以传递给大家，大家可以去看一下。然后今天的这个Mollgaard教授今天要谈的是这个另外一个议题是这个儒家的我刚刚说他跟杜伟明写博士论文说他博士论文的题目是早期儒家的伦理学，所以今天Mollgaard教授要回到他最原始的研究兴趣，也许可以这样说，儒家我是对这个演讲有非常高的期待，因为Mollgaard教授有会提出一些我觉得非常另类的
见解、想法。他的研究的今天演讲的题目是 Can Confucians universalize themselves？ 就是这些儒者你是否能把自己加以图片化，是不是？或者就是图片化儒记化？这个问题我想是一个很有蛮有趣的一个议题所以大家等一下应该会有很多想法，所以我就不多说了就是接下来 Eske 应该会有英文进行演讲，那你大概会打算讲多久？或者是 How long will you be speaking?
We have 2 hours.
Yeah, 2 hours. Yeah, so
maybe 45.
Okay, so we have this first part 45 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. So I'm looking forward to those parts, and I welcome Eske Mollgaard.
Thank you so much. Yes, I have to speak in English. And thank you for this nice introduction. I think now already you know something about me. So it is true, I started, I'm kind of embarrassed. Do you all understand English? It's clear enough. I was embarrassed that Professor Marshall found my dissertation. But anyway, it is there. So I did the dissertation with Confucianism, and then I wrote the book on Taoism. But now I kind of returned to Confucianism for some reason, which is that, which I write here in the abstract, that especially because of the rise of China and because Confucianism is being revived in China in many ways that maybe we can talk about, but certainly a revival. And because the Western universalism is going down, right? There has been a lot of criticism about Western universalism taking the form of imperialism and so on and so forth. So today we kind of have it seems to at least two possibilities today, because as I see it, all of this is mediated by capitalism. So we have two possibilities, either American neoliberal capitalism or the East Asian, now mainly Chinese form of capitalism. These seem to be the two choices. Both are very bad, in my opinion. Because if you look what is happening inside both the US and China, well, I think without doubt mainland China is a police state, but also in the US is beginning to become like a police state. If you have read especially the recent reports about all the uprisings in Ferguson and so on and so forth, if you see the US police now, they are equipped with equipment from the US Army. So I think this is a sign that the division between East China and the US is not a question of fight between the two. The two actually go together, but in a very bad way, which we can talk about. So I was kind of worried about this. Like a good Confucian, I was worried. So we have the question of universality. Now it looks like all these universalities are breaking down. And some people argue, okay, we can do without universality. We can just have a nice multicultural world, multipolar world, and so on. I'm not so convinced about that argument. I think we need not to have universality, but we need to universalize ourselves. So this, I use the word, you try to say it in Chinese, to universalize yourself, that is a verb. So I'm not, in this paper, I'm not talking about a kind of a priori sense of universality that you have to put down on everybody. But I'm asking, can we, as individuals, as particular people living in particular culture, can we universalize ourselves? And here, of course, the question is, can Confucians universalize themselves? Because it looks like, in mainland China, okay, they did universalize themselves as communists, no doubt. Communism is a way where individuals, where you can universalize yourself. But of course, unfortunately, it didn't go so well. And then after the opening up and so on, now they are trying to universalize themselves through Confucianism. So I raise this question: is it possible to universalize yourself through Confucianism? And I take it for almost, you can say, I take it for granted that you can universalize yourself through Western philosophy. That's kind of the starting point. And then also you could universalize yourself through something like Christianity. And I think communism, in a way, come out of that. But now the question is, today, can we also universalize ourselves through Confucianism? That is the question that I'm raising here. So first in the paper, I have something about Mollgaard, who, he was, I think, very important. He realized that that Western philosophy was the way to universalize yourself, and then he worked very closely with Kant, the Kantian text. He translated 3 critiques of Kant, and he basically he went that way. But so this is, I just raised. It's not that I'm not a scholar of Mollgaard, but I just use him as an example of a quite up till now quite dominant way where Confucians will say Confucianism is a philosophy, and we can universalize ourselves in the same way as Western philosophers do through Confucianism. So I just now, for clarity, sake of clarity, or I just say no. That's not possible to do that through Confucianism. Then we haven't. Now, usually I was so this, and this has also something to do with another point, which is, as I was studying with Dueming, and he, of course, has this idea that Confucianism can be universalized through going through Western religion or Western philosophy and going that way. And I always, that was when I studied in the United States, that was the general view. And I was also working, when I wrote that dissertation, I was working under the assumption, yes, Confucianism is a kind of humanism, maybe philosophical, maybe religious, but a form of humanism in the Western sense. And that it in a way, it was universalizing in the similar sense as the West. I think that whole tradition, especially in American sinology, in American philosophical sinology, I think that is breaking down now. As far as I'm concerned, it is finished. And that has to do with the rise of China. And so we are moving in, Chinese scholars now are pushing very hard for a different type of reading of Confucianism, which is not so much philosophical, religious, but more like political Confucianism. And so in the paper, I just take 2 extremes of political Confucianism. One extreme is Jiang Qing, and the other one, so Jiang Qing is extremely fundamentalist. And then the other one I take is Joseph Chan, who is at Hong Kong University, and he's extremely liberal. So I take both of them. I know there are many other ones in between, but I just take those two. Now, if you take Jiang Qing, then I think he's very important because he stands. He says things that are terrible, at least from a Western point of view, especially from all of those in the West who think Confucianism is something very nice. and I have not heard them yet answer him, really. And I think that is very strange, because he says things that are totally 100% against the Western democratic mindset. Like we should, we should not all, it's not one person, one vote, for instance. Who should have more votes? The older people, because they are wiser and so on and so forth, right? So he says these things which are very Confucian, but totally against any type of liberal Confucianism. I don't want to, you probably know all his views, so I don't want to repeat all that. But then on the other hand, you have somebody like Joseph Chan, and he will say, look, Confucianism is still a beautiful thing. What he calls Confucian perfectionism is a beautiful thing, and he thinks Confucian ideals can actually be realized better in the modern liberal democratic world, right? So he will say, today we can actually realize Confucianism through democracy, through civil society, personal autonomy, human rights, rule of law, and social justice. These are all things that Jiang Qing rejects out of hand. So then Joseph Chan, he says, okay, today we cannot use the idea of the sage ruler. We cannot use the idea of ritual, like that there should be one set of ritual for everybody. We also cannot use that. But if you look at his book, then there's one, so I was wondering, what is the one traditional Confucian thing Joseph Chan, he still want to still have retained. And there he talks about the bond between ruler and the people, special bond between ruler and people in Confucianism. And this bond between the ruler and the people, he describes it like this. He says, the Confucian ideal conception of political relationship moves beyond the outer sphere of objective reasons and rights and enter into the inner space of the mind and disposition of ruler and ruled. So Joseph Chan, he wants all the, rule of law, he wants democracy, he wants all that, but he wants to retain this special bond between the ruler and the ruled, which is not a bond that is objectified into any kind of institutions, but it is, he called it an affective bond. And he also calls it a moral bond. And it's a kind of, the people feel a sense of gratitude to the ruler because the ruler provides for them. I mean, this is this ancient, Confucian idea that the ruler is like the father, mother of the people and so on, and then the people are like the children who are gratitude and so on. So he wants to retain this bond. Now here I see a big danger, which is because if you look at it, such an effective bond between ruler and ruled, I think is actually, well, I find some similarity in Italian fascism of the 1930s probably, but I think it is very dangerous. Now, you also find it in Mencius, right? Mencius, he says, okay, when the true king goes out to rectify people, that's meaning in a way to punish people because they have done something wrong, then the people will say, please come and rectify me. Come and beat me up because I know I have been a bad boy. That's basically the idea. And that is why for Mencius, the true ruler has no enemies, because there is this kind of affective bond. Now, So in traditional Confucianism, you have this affective bond between the good ruler and the people. But in traditional Confucianism, you also have sage. The good ruler also supposed to be a sage ruler. He's also supposed to follow ritual. He's also supposed to listen to the Confucian advisors and so on and so forth, right? But Joseph Chan, he takes all that away. He takes all the idea of sage ruler away. He takes away the idea of ritual and so on, and only the bond is left. And so this, I think, is even worse. Now, Joseph Chan, I mean, I'm not saying he's the fastest or anything like that. He's a very nice, good, liberal person who just likes Confucianism. But I think you can see here, at least this is what I want to suggest, that to mix Confucianism and liberal values is actually worse than what Jiang Qing is doing, which is to just throw Confucianism right in your face and say, here it is. So that's just, I'm sure you will disagree with that, and it's something I throw out for discussion. So, okay, so if we say this now, Confucianism cannot be universalized through philosophy. Confucianism as a political Confucianism cannot mix with liberal democratic values. Then we have the situation where Confucianism and Western philosophy, you might say, are just totally opposed. There's no, you cannot mix them. So this is the point where I say, okay, we should not immediately, I think it is very wrong to immediately to fall into this kind of, oh, we are all brothers and sisters and we can all figure things out and so on. I think this is the ideology that we should avoid. So we have to consider the opposition here. Now, then, how do we then judge if you have two claims to universality, like the Confucian, and you have the claim to universality of Western philosophy, and these two are incommensurable? How do you choose, or how do you adjudicate between them? Now, very interesting. Jiang Qing, he says that there will be no discussion. We just wait and see. If China becomes much stronger than the West, even more stronger than the West, then China will win. If the West, which basically means the United States, manage to fight off China, then the Western values will win. Europe will probably do nothing at this point. So there is this is what Jiang Qing says. Okay, now, so we can, in a certain way, again here, Jiang Qing is very, very realistic. Let's not fool ourselves. This might be, a lot of these so-called philosophical problems, they are actually decided by power. A lot of people have said, history is told by the victor, right? The one who wins out tells the story about who is best and so on. Nevertheless, from the point of view of Western philosophy, we cannot accept that. If you're a philosopher, and Western philosophy, I don't mean people who are born in the West, but anybody who practices Western philosophy or philosophy. From the point of view of philosophy, you cannot, of course, accept that power decides. Who should decide? Well, the philosopher should decide. Because it is the philosopher who is supposed to adjudicate between two different arguments. But then the Confucians come back and they say, but philosophy is a product of Western culture, so it is already it is already prejudiced against the Confucian sage knowledge. Let's put it like that. Now, so here I talk a little bit about the Italian philosopher Gianni Vattimo. Because his argument is this. He says, yes, it is true. Western philosophy is bound to Western culture. And as such, it has no privileged position in regard to Confucianism. Now, of course, there are others also, Hinduism or whatever, but let's say Confucianism. It has no privileged position, except this. That in this situation we are in today, where Western universality, that means philosophy, has been reduced to culture, then claims to universality come up. They spring up. It is not that these different cultures, they just kind of don't produce claims to universality. They still, this idea that we somehow, like in the Lao Tzu, a small community, you can listen to the dogs barking over there, but you never go there. This is not the case. We are not just listening to dogs barking, we are listening to claims to universality rising all over the world. I mean, just take the Islamic fundamentalists that are now fighting the ISIS. They have a very strong claim to universality based on the Islamic Ummah and so on and so forth. So you have to respond to that. I mean, you can respond to it as we do with weapons, and hopefully we will win by weapons. But on the other hand, that is not enough. But, so the point here is that since this claim to universality keeps popping up, Vattimo says philosophy, which is, of course, Western philosophy, actually returns, even if Western philosophy now knows that it is a product of a particular culture, and therefore it does not have any strong claim to universality, but nevertheless it is almost like in Taoism that the weaker you get, the stronger you get. It is a kind of strange argument he has, or not strange, but a kind of subtle argument. It is exactly when the West declines that by the West we understand now Western philosophy. It is exactly in the moment of the decline of philosophy, when Western philosophy is seen to be just one of many cultures. It is exactly in that moment that philosophy again rises to a new power, although he calls it a kind of weak power. Now this has to do, Vattimo, it has to do with the whole idea of nihilism, which I would like to, it's something I didn't really go into in the paper, but I've been thinking about it a little bit more. I think this is what we have to get into, because especially if you look on this whole idea of the rise of China, like that is the rise of a power. But so China is rising, the West is declining. But the funny thing, which maybe many of the Chinese intellectuals don't see, and I don't know, because in a way they can read it in the Tao Te Ching, it is exactly in declining that you become strong. So the West is now actually becoming stronger because it is declining in the form of nihilism. And there's the whole question if the Chinese, if Confucianism is able to go through this history of nihilism. Okay. So let me just. So Vattimo's argument goes like this. If you put it very schematically, Vattimo says this: all claims to universality are products of particular cultures. In other words, they are interpretations. That is the first thing. Number two, in saying this, I also speak from a particular culture, namely the postmodern European culture. And therefore what I say, Vattimo say, also an interpretation. Okay, so here it looks like he's going into a kind of performative contradiction. But then comes the third step, and the third step is, he says, today, in the age of nihilism, we cannot not interpret. So this is this step is supposed to overcome the objection that you are actually getting into a performative contradiction. You know, something like Habermas doesn't like. Okay, so this is a kind of, I would say, in a way it's a kind of postmodern, but you know, Vattimo is not totally postmodern, because you can see, if you read him closely, you can see actually it is almost an argument for European Eurocentrism, almost an argument for supremacy of European philosophy. Okay, so but let's not be immediately be. I mean, if I said this in the US, of course, I would be a dead man. But I hope here you're more open-minded. But nevertheless, if the argument is complicated, and I think it is not so easy to see through. So therefore, I went back and investigating this question of universality, and I said, okay, let's go back to the good old days in Europe, but there was no doubt that European philosophy was universal. And I went back to Husserl, right? Now Edmund Husserl, he gave some very interesting lectures late in his career in the 1930s, just before fascism overcame Europe. And he was basically arguing, he said, what is philosophy? For him, meaning Western philosophy, but not just, I mean, he thought philosophy would, of course, spread itself to the whole world. But he made a distinction. He said, yes, philosophy started in Greece, but it started in Greece as a breakthrough through Greek culture. There was a kind of, he called it a spiritual breakthrough. And then almost immediately in ancient Greece, philosophy became a culture. But in the moment of the breakthrough, philosophy, according to Husserl, was not a culture. And this is it is this moment of the breakthrough where philosophy is not a culture that Husserl tries to recapture in his late phenomenology and his philosophy. So if you read Husserl there and you see how the argument is there, then the argument is this. Yes, philosophy started in Europe, but philosophy is something strange to Europe. It is something that disturbs the Europeans. As a matter of fact, the real philosophy is opposed to European culture. It is not European culture. But, so there is this in Europe that if we say that the essence of being European is to have philosophy, what does that mean? That means that you are European only when you cease being European, when you stop being a European in terms of your culture, because that is what philosophy demands of you, that you find that moment where your identity is simply what you share with others. That is the essence of philosophy, right? I mean, even if you go back, I think that is the beauty of philosophy, that all of us disappear, and we just talk together, and we disappear in the discourse, so to speak. So, in that disappearance, that is the moment of philosophy, and that is the cessation of Europe. So if you look at it, it's very interesting with Husserl. And this is what, I mean, I don't want to be kind of theatrical or something like that, but I think today we are in a very dangerous situation. And similar to what Husserl said, if we cannot universalize ourselves, then somebody else will universalize us for us, and probably in a terrible way, just like it happened in the 30s. Husserl was saying, if you don't return to that moment of being true European, which means you stop being European, then basically what happened, if you don't disappear as European, then you will disappear in war, Second World War, right? Similar today, if we don't universalize ourselves in some way, I think also we are not in a very good situation. So, okay. Then we come to the Confucians. So now can Confucians universalize themselves? In a way, you have to, because as I said, if you can't universalize yourself, we might be in a big trouble. So if you look at the Confucianism, you can find many quotes from Confucians where it looks like they have a strong sense of universality and so on and so on. So you have those. But if I just in this paper I just look at three main kind of big ideas in Confucianism, which is Li, ritual, and the other Li, which is principle, and then the idea of the gong, universal. Now here, there's no doubt that for Confucians, ritual is a kind of paradigmatic situation. The Confucian cultivates himself from early on. If you're a Confucian, you cultivate yourself, and once you cultivate yourself, then your form of life becomes normative. Like the Junzi, right? The Junzi is the cultivated person, and his form of life becomes normative, and all the others, they should somehow try to imitate that. So that is the way the Junzi behaves, the way and all of that. Behave according to ritual. So what is it that ritual does? Well, ritual basically says, okay, if I don't know, ritual takes something. It takes something specific. Now this is just a cup, right? Although this is quite a nice cup. But if this was a ritual cup, then it becomes something sublime, right? And everybody should, you should behave in a way that is appropriate with this sublime object. So you should use it like that. Or maybe when you sit on your chair, maybe you should sit like that, right? And so on and so forth. And this is all ritual. Now to sit straight up, yeah, no matter, no one. I'm sure it's healthy, but it's also proper way to give something. Or if I give the cup to a woman, I don't touch the woman, and so on and so forth, right? Now these are all the particulars of a culture, but they are raised up to universal level. So if you're kind of slumping in your chair and you just, you touch the woman when you give her some tea and so on, then you are barbarian. You are not part of the actually humanity. I mean, you can go so far. So you are only universal when you raise these kind of actually quite everyday things. You raise them up to a sublime level. Okay. So I think this is the essence of Confucian universality. You can also see it in the Li, in the principle. Now, principle especially became more important later in Confucianism with the leisure and so on. And there is, of course, the Li has a more, you might say, it has more potential for universality, or it is a more broader form of universality than ritual. But even this Li, if you read the text there, you see what especially the leisure people, what the Neo-Confucians and so on, Daoshi and all those, what they mean by Li is really the same as we saw in ritual. It is you elevate something particular to sublime status. Why is it Li ritual to mourn for 3 months? Why not 1 month? Could also be lean. No, 3 months. Why? Because Confucius, he said, I'm not comfortable with less than 3 months. So the 3 months is, in a way, there's no really difference between 3 months or 3 days and so on, but it has been elevated. Something particular is elevated up to something sublime. And also, if you take the notion of gong, which of course is even more modern in a sense, of course it goes back also, but it was used in the modern period in a way to overcome the whole traditional system. But if you look at the notion of, the modern Chinese state is supposed to be gong, right? But here I rely on Peter Sarrow's book, and he says basically that all these late Qing intellectuals, when they thought about the new modern Chinese state, he says they turned the state into an abstraction, redefining it, and so distinguishing a transcendental imagined Chinese state from any actual government. I think this is very true. The Chinese state, I'm not talking about Taiwan, but certainly in the mainland, the state itself as a kind of imagined state, there's something, again, particular being raised to a sublime level. All these poor people out here some woman out here in Sichuan, she has some problem, so she takes the train and buses and she tried to go to Beijing because she thinks somewhere up there is some kind of sublime justice that she can talk to, right? This is this idea that it is not, but it doesn't exist. It's just an illusion that you have this kind of sublime state that you can turn to. So anyway, this might be maybe something we can also discuss. Okay, so in this way you can see we have 3 different kinds of universality. We have the philosophical, we have what I will call the Christian, and what I will call the Confucian. So the philosophical way to universalize yourself, that is that you, as we have said, you disappear. You yourself as an individual, you yourself as a cultural person, you disappear in the pursuit of the idea. Let's just put it like that, because now Husserl, he likes ideas, right? So I'll just put it like that. Then we have another one, which is the Christian way to attain universality. That is very different. But you see, very interesting. In Christianity, they say the kingdom of heaven was built on the rejected stone. So there was one stone that was rejected in creating this society we live in. And that rejected stone is the foundation of the kingdom of heaven. That is very interesting. What is the rejected stone? Well, in the United States, it's illegal immigrants. In Nazi Germany, it was the Jews. Maybe in Israel, it's the Palestinians. And in China, in China, I said the Liudong-Winkel, like the floating population. But I don't know. So, but there's always, from the Christian point of view, if you want to universalize yourself, you have to first find where is the rejected element, right? Where is the one that is rejected? Because that one will speak the truth, so to speak, about the whole is rotten. The whole society is totally rotten. And nobody will tell you the truth except that poor person who was rejected. That is a Christian point of view. Now, what about the Confucians? As I have said several times now, the Confucians' way to universality is to take something particular. It could be a cup, it could be a hat, it could be your whole culture, basically, or the idea of the state, and raise it up to, you think it is something sublime. Now, the important thing to understand that for Confucians, it is not the actually Confucian state that Confucian thinks is sublime. All the Confucians, big Confucians, the Chunru, like the pure Confucians, they always said Confucian culture is rotten. is in a terrible situation. It's full of selfishness. But maybe tomorrow, if somebody will just listen to what I say, then the true Confucian culture will return, right? So I think it is a big mistake or it's not a mistake, it's probably because they are not true Confucians. But if you say Confucianism is the same as Chinese culture, then this is not traditional Confucianism at all. Confucianism is only Chinese culture. It's a kind of, that is not true universality, but the Confucians would like to sublimate or make this kind of culture, put it into a kind of sublime form. Okay, so we have those three. Then we can say, okay, we have those three types, these three ways of universalizing yourself: Confucian, Christian, and philosophical. Then we can say, what about today, in today's society? Which of these three forms have best chance of being, who can have the best chance of universalize themselves in today's society? We take the philosopher. Actually, I will not talk about the Christian. Perhaps the Christians always have the best chance. You know, they are in a way they attain universality through suffering. Like Buddhism also talk about suffering, right? And maybe that, you know, the weak, they are so weak, the weakest of the weak. And maybe that is the only way to go, but I'm not talking about that. But so I talk about philosophy, Western philosophy or philosophy. The problem here is that philosophy has already been universalized, but as Husserl also pointed out, in a bad way, through technoscience and capitalism. It has been I'm talking about philosophy now as philosophy and science being closely aligned. But this way of Western thinking has already been universalized, but in a bad way, not as a kind of simulacrum. It's something, it looks like it, but it's not the real philosophy, because so it's not a true. So it has become globalized, but to globalize is not the same as universalize yourself. There's a distinction between those two. Now, what about Confucianism? Confucian idea of universality has to do with raising something particular to the level of sublime. Now, I thought there was an interesting thing, because if you look at Karl Marx's analysis of commodity fetishism, right, and even the society we live in, it's actually also commodity fetishism is really, you raise something basic, like, okay, I need a cup, or let's say I need a pair of socks, and it's just use value, right? And I go into the shopping mall. Can I find a pair of socks? No. It's almost impossible. I find a fantasy world of socks that if I buy these socks, which are quite expensive, then I will somehow be an Italian movie star or something like that, right? So it is something very simple, like socks or cups in commodity fetishism is being raised up to some kind of sublime status. I think you probably will agree, this is the norm. This is the norm of the society we live in. We don't relate anymore to objects as just use value. It is all sublimated in some form. So here I see a similarity between the Confucian way of universalizing yourself. That is, that something particular is being raised to the universal. So in a certain sense, I think maybe Confucianism is quite compatible with late capitalist societies. I just throw that out as a kind of suggestion. But there is one problem or one issue in late capitalist society, which is that capitalism does not want to rule the world. They don't want to rule the world. They just want to own it. They just want to pay for it. They don't care who rules the world. It could be a democrat. It could be a totalitarian person. Capitalists don't care. Also, the capitalism doesn't care what kind of way of life you have. As a matter of fact, that's why way of lives are slowly disappearing, because nobody really cares about them. Now, this gives rise to a lot of anxiety. You see it certainly in Europe. There's a lot of anxiety. People are, and also United States. But you see, United States still have a strong military, so they kind of put all their hopes in the military. But in Europe, where they don't have any military power, they are beginning to become quite nervous, and because they have all this capital society, they actually have all the consumerism and so on. But it looks like there's nobody in charge. And you see now also fascism coming back, at least to some degree, especially in Eastern Europe. So what I'm saying here in the paper is that at this point, both in the East, certainly in the West, but people are yearning for the shepherd to return. They are yearning for somebody to come back and tell us what is really the good life, right? Where are we going? How should we behave, and so on. I think here, Confucianism also is very compatible with our predicament today, because this is exactly, and of course in mainland China, that's what they use Confucianism for, to fill up this vacuum. I mean, they unleash capitalism, and then everybody are consuming crazily, but to consume is endless. And then we ask, what is it all for? And then we get no answer. And the Communist Party cannot give an answer. But then they say, well, you have your Confucian tradition, so here's an answer. I think maybe in the West, they also are yearning for that. I don't know if they will accept quite Confucius, but there is that issue there. So in that sense, also, I just have something, because I was talking with Professor Jiwei Si in Hong Kong, and he has I thought a very interesting book called Moral China, and he actually thinks China might have a mission in the world. So he's not a pro-communist or anything like, but he thinks the Chinese might, and he's not even Confucian, pro-Confucian, but he thinks that maybe because he says the Chinese people cannot, at least at this point, live without the knowledge that there is somebody who occupies the place of the good, that there's somebody, traditionally it was the sage, right? There's somebody who knows, there's somebody in charge, there's somebody who knows what is good for us all. That's what he said. He said they cannot do that. And here again we get into this whole question of nihilism that maybe we can discuss. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eske. Brilliant talk, and very insightful, and full of insights. And you talked for about 60 minutes, but I think we would need 10 hours to figure out, or maybe 5 hours at least, to figure out what we can accept, or how of your talk, or how we can relate ourselves to your talk. And I found it very rich and indeed very insightful. And I don't want to abuse my right as a moderator. We have about 60 minutes, and I'm really looking forward to listening to some of your voices. And maybe I just ask one question, just very briefly, because I found this idea of one of your core ideas is, which came out very clearly at the end, is that global capitalism as it is today is very much compatible to Confucianism, or Confucian doctrine is very much compatible to global capitalism. And as you just said, the idea of the shepherd, there with somebody knows the places good and could tell us how to live and what the political orders should look alike. I thought this very intriguing in a way. And just to put it, to ask one question, maybe you can answer now or later on, like, because we have somebody like Wang Hui in China, Wang Hui, who has written this huge book on the rise of modern China, or modern Chinese thought, and he too seems to think that there is something in Confucianism which needs to be taken seriously, which can help us in thinking about very Marxist issues, critique of capitalism. So yes, because you brought some very good examples about the idea of a ritual with a cup and elevating you rise the cup and somehow you elevate the cup into the status of a sublime, and that is a very thoughtful description of the Confucian ritual. And then you had this example of this woman in Sichuan, which somehow from a feeling of injustice moves to the capital, to Beijing, and takes a train to Beijing, and then thinks that somebody is there is something, a sublime force, which can help her. So So I have been thinking, is the ritual, is this form of life which Confucians have described in their texts, is it really so, is this really a real or complete description of this form, Confucian form of life? Is it really so compatible with global consumerist forms of life? So I have been, so Wang Hui seems to think, have a kind of slightly different perspective. He thinks there is a critical potential in Confucianism, which could help us in not only criticizing capitalism and consumerism, but even to overcome it. So in your talk you seem to be highly skeptical. So for example, the whole tradition of political protest, which we find in China from the beginning in the Ming Dynasty, or even earlier, the Song Dynasty, under the influence of Mencius, you have all these people going into the streets and then kneeling down in front of the authorities and then burning incense and then somehow asking for social justice or social equality. And Wang Hui seems to think a lot of these traditions, these practices are somehow critical of an unequal distribution of capital, maybe we could say this or in these terms. And isn't there something to this? Isn't there a critical moment in such forms of life, political protest, and they are often inspired by Mencius. There is a commitment to political order to the center, this I admit, but at the same time, it might help not only Chinese people, but a lot of people in moving forward and achieving some sort of justice, social equality.
I think so.
Does it really fit, like Confucian forms of life, do they really fit so easily into global capital?
I don't think it fits easily. I just was just a couple of suggestions, as I don't. But if it comes down to Confucian, I mean, global capitalism will destroy everything, also Confucianism. So I don't think there will not be such a thing as Confucian capitalism eventually. But and it's also true, of course, there is a potential anti-capitalist potential in Confucianism, and especially this fight for social justice has been very strong in East Asia. Like, for instance, you saw it in Korea, where they were fighting for, I think, 20 years. And a lot of that the student movement in Korea was also influenced by Confucian's idea, this whole very strong social against inequality and against injustice. So I think this certainly is a good you can have that kind of, and there are some people who think that even China today is an anti-capitalist anti-capitalist. I think Aguirre we talked about maybe.
Yeah.
And especially in the United States, there are many in the field of cultural studies. They think anything that is not Western is a kind of anti-capitalist. Now you have to be anti-capitalist. So anything that is not Western is, especially not American, is anti-capitalist. And even like mainland China, so-called communist China, is they believe that there is a possibility that China will somehow show us a new form of capitalism. But I think they, of course, mainly are talking about because they think that there's still the socialist movement in China still has some power. That might be true, but I think this is a kind of imaginary from the West. Like if you look at this is a big problem. If you look at the Western left wing in the West, starting with the Maoists, they always thought that the liberation would come from outside the West. Everything inside the West was bad, but outside the West everything was good, including Kim Il-sung and all of those. I remember when I was young, I saw some of these left-wing guys, they would run around with pictures of Kim Il-sung. So that is, I think it was a huge mistake, and unfortunately this is kind of lingering on in especially the American academy. You have to be somehow anti-American in order to say anything. Now, but you're right. When I talked with Jiwei, he thought that there was a possibility that something might shift inside China, mainland China, that there might, and it's true. He said to me, things can happen very quickly, and it's true. I mean, all the time I have been kind of thinking about China and all the changes that have happened. Nobody has ever predicted it. Not at least in the West. Nobody had ever predicted any of the big changes that has happened. So it is possible that, and I hope so, that that something will shift in. Now we talk about the Chinese Confucian culture. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I'm not saying there is not that potential. Nevertheless, I still think that if you pursue the road of social justice purely within the Confucian context, I remember doing when there was the Tiananmen uprising, and they raised the Statue of Liberty, but also then the students went up to beg with like this, right, in the Confucian way. And he said, oh, it was bad to raise the Statue of Liberty because that's Western, and they should always go like this because that is the Confucian way. Yeah, if you go like this, yeah, you do oppose, and maybe you get something, but I still think it is not. I actually believe you have to become. It's not a workable situation. At least that's how I look at it.